Coming up in our newscast tonight. During a meeting between the defense chiefs of Korea and the U.S., James Mattis reaffirms Washington's commitment to denuclearizing the peninsula and maintaining the U.S. troop level in the nation. The latest round of inter-Korean talks brought together the vice transport ministers from Seoul and Pyongyang. They agreed to simultaneously get things started in modernizing certain highways connecting the two sides. Up against defending World Cup champ Germany, the odds were stacked against Team South Korea. The Taeguk Warriors scorched the net twice while conceding nothing in their final match in Russia. News Center begins now. It's 8 p.m. here in Korea, live from our studio in Seoul. This is Arirang News Center. Welcome to our program. I'm Daniel Choi. The nation's defense minister met with his American counterpart James Mattis today in Seoul during their third meeting following sit-downs in Hawaii and Singapore earlier this year. The duo agreed now is a significant moment for the Korean peninsula. Park Ji-won has our top story.
In their opening statement before closed-door meeting, the two defense chiefs reaffirmed their steadfast and ironclad alliance, vowing that they will continue, quote, watertight consultations at a time when major changes are happening on the Korean peninsula.
We're standing at a turning point between the dark shadow of conflict and confrontation that hung over the Korean peninsula for the last 70 years, and the brighter new history of peace and cooperation. This is a precious opportunity made by President Moon and U.S. President Trump's vision and decisions. South Korea and the U.S. pledged their utmost effort to ensure that this opportunity not only leads to the peace and the prosperity of the Korean peninsula, but also Northeast Asia and the world.
They also confirmed the decision to suspend the Freedom Guardian exercise originally scheduled for this August. Mattis said the suspension of the joint military exercises will create a better environment for diplomats to negotiate with the North.
The recent decision to suspend the Freedom Guardian exercise creates increased opportunity for our diplomats to negotiate, increasing prospects for a peaceful solution on the peninsula. At the same time, the U.S. and ROK forces remain united, vigilant, and ready to defend against any challenge.
The suspension of the Freedom Guardian exercise, however, doesn't mean that the two countries will suspend all future military drills. Military sources told Arirang News that the two defense chiefs agreed that the two countries will decide the timing, scope, and scale of future joint military drills and announce the details together, considering the North's progress in denuclearization and the military's combat readiness. Mattis also stressed that the U.S. will maintain its current troop levels on the peninsula.
U.S. commitment to the Republic of Korea remains ironclad, and the U.S. will continue to use the full range of diplomatic and military capabilities to uphold this commitment. And this includes maintaining the current U.S. force levels on the Korean peninsula.
The two leaders also shared a common view that international sanctions on the North should remain in effect until Pyongyang takes concrete and irreversible steps for denuclearization. The two defense chiefs also briefly discussed the transfer of wartime operational control to South Korea, but didn't reveal many details of those discussions. They stressed that this year marks the 65th anniversary of the signing of the bilateral mutual defense treaty and 50 years of close consultation through annual joint security consultative meetings, and they vowed to further strengthen the alliance in pursuit of the shared goal of peace in the region. Park Ji-won, Arirang News.
America's top diplomat expressed confidence that North Korea understood the scope of Washington's desire for complete denuclearization. Meanwhile, the U.S. National Security Advisor pushed Pyongyang to move quicker. Cha Sang-min zooms in on the two officials' take on how the regime should go about dismantling its nukes.
UN Secretary of State Mike Pompeo has stated that contacts with North Korea are ongoing, with him in the lead of the communication. However, during testimony to the Senate Appropriations Committee on Wednesday, Pompeo refused to give any details. He said he was not prepared to talk about internal discussions taking place with Pyongyang, calling it inappropriate and counterproductive, before adding that the North Koreans would be, quote, watching this hearing. The top U.S. diplomat said he was sure the regime knew the scope of the denuclearization the Trump administration is calling for.
The North Koreans understand the scope of the request that we're making with respect to denuclearization and the elements that would be required. So we've been pretty unambiguous in our conversations about what we mean when we say complete denuclearization.
Pompeo also confirmed that no remains of U.S. soldiers killed during the Korean War have been handed over by the North, but said he was optimistic they will be in the not-too-distant future. Meanwhile, President Trump's National Security Advisor John Bolton, during his visit to Moscow on Wednesday, had more to add on North Korea's denuclearization. When asked whether Trump plans to attend the 4th Eastern Economic Forum in Vladivostok, to which North Korean leader Kim Jong-un is invited, Bolton chose instead to express his anticipation for the regime to start giving up its nuclear weapons without delay.
I don't know the answer to that. It's possible, but I do expect that following on to the meeting in Singapore, that discussions with North Korea on the denuclearization of North Korea are going to proceed quickly. At least that's our hope and expectation.
차상미, Arirang News.
The first ever meeting between the leaders of Pyongyang and Washington was a welcome development by the world. But many felt the agreement reached on denuclearizing North Korea left much to be desired as it lacked specifics. A veteran U.S. State Department analyst begs to differ that a slow but steady approach could win the race in the long run. Sooyoung sat down with John Merrill for his take on what was produced in Singapore.
So you've been at the State Department for nearly 30 years, analysing North Korea. You've seen quite a lot of US presidents come and go. So what would you say sets the Trump administration apart in terms of North Korea policy? And would you say it is close to achieving success on denuclearizing the North?
The verdict is still out on whether it's going to be successful or not. But I think the summit was a very promising start. I think Trump is different from his predecessors in a number of important ways. He knows, as a businessman and a deal maker, that the first thing that you have to do is to establish a bit of rapport with your opposite number. So I think he's been much more prepared to do that than his predecessors, who were standoffish. So I think that approach has produced some results. And of course, he's been helped by the fact that he's dealing with a new type of leader in North Korea, Kim Jong-un, and by a progressive president in the South.
Well, there is quite a lot of concern regarding the apparent downsizing of joint military exercises between South Korea and the United States. And you've said in the past that halting such war games in the South could make way for engagement with the North or even a deal on denuclearization. Yeah. So would you still stand by that position?
Yes, but with some qualifications. I've never advocated doing away with military exercises entirely. I think these war games had grown to over-the-top exercises. When you have 3 aircraft carrier battle groups with 3 air wings, and all those planes, many of the planes are nuclear capable, it's too much, particularly if what you're trying to convince North Korea to do is denuclearize. That sends just the opposite message.
Your Secretary of State, Mike Pompeo, did say earlier this week that he believes there is no timeline on this denuclearization.
I was very happy to see that, and he's exactly right. Sometimes the best is the enemy of the good. If we front load this process too much and demand complete, verifiable, irreversible denuclearization, I'm not sure we're going to get much of anything. This is obviously something that's going to take years. This is a process that's going to have to build up momentum gradually.
Well, what would you say is the next step for the United States in securing the complete and verifiable denuclearization of North Korea?
I think you just have to go into this process with your eyes open, and you have to be patient. Apparently, we just submitted or about to submit a long list of asks to North Korea. I think it's unlikely we're going to get everything we want at the outset. What I would like to see is a down payment on denuclearization. North Korea send some fissile material, maybe to the US, maybe to China or some other nuclear weapons state. And I would like to see the IAEA back in there. And I would like to see progress on other issues like human rights, for example. And I think this is all possible.
I see. Well, thank you very much for your time today, Dr. Merrill.
It's been a pleasure. Thank you for having me. I'm a big fan of Arirang TV.
Thank you.
Really? Chincha.
On Tuesday, the two Koreas held talks on linking up and modernizing their railroads, and today another meeting was held, this time to discuss connecting their highways. The session continued for hours and starting at 10 a.m. local time. Seoul and Pyongyang finally released a joint press statement. Oh Jung-hee fills us in on what the two sides agreed on.
In their talks on Thursday, the two Koreas determined some specific parts of roads in the north end of those crossing the border to modernize, and they'll start checking the status of these roads from August.
We agreed that modernizing the Donghae and Gyeonggi roads is important to achieving balanced economic development and common prosperity.
There are two roads they're hoping to work on: the Gyeonggi Road that links Seoul and the North Korean city of Sinuiju, and the Donghae Road along the peninsula's east coast. On the eastern route, they've decided to modernize the section between the cities of Goseong and Wonsan, and on the western route, the section between the North Korean cities of Kaesong and Pyongyang. The two Koreas will work together on the road's design and construction with the hope of holding a groundbreaking ceremony as soon as possible. For all this to happen, the two Koreas will first check together on the sections that are to be upgraded.
To connect and modernize the roads between the south and the north, we've decided to first form a joint team to conduct research and inspections. The work will start with the Gyeonggi Road in August.
Seoul and Pyongyang also promised to co-develop the advanced technology necessary for building and operating these roads. They'll also continue to exchange documents and hold working-level talks to set up practical measures for joint research and road upgrades. Oh Jung-hee, Arirang News.
Seoul and Pyongyang agreed to field joint teams in canoeing, rowing, and women's basketball at the 2018 Asian Games set to kick off in August in Indonesia. The announcement was made at a meeting in Jakarta between the Olympic Council of Asia, the Games organizers, and National Olympic Committee of the two Koreas. There will be no other additions to the categories, and further details will be decided later. But for certain, South and North Korea will march together during the closing and opening ceremonies of the Asian Games. Hundreds of Koreans were forced to toil in coal mines under inhumane conditions in Japan's Hashima Island. That hell on earth is glorified by Tokyo and even earned a World Heritage Site status while hiding its dark history. UNESCO urged Japan to inform the world of all aspects of the so-called battleship island. Lee Ji-won gets us up to speed with the developments.
UNESCO has urged Japan to tell the world about the brutalities committed against the Koreans it forced to work on Hashima Island during World War II. The decision was made Wednesday at a meeting of UNESCO's World Heritage Committee, which looked at Japan's progress on the commitments it made when the industrial facilities, including those on Hashima, were registered as World Cultural Heritage Sites in 2015. At that time, Tokyo had promised to publicize Hashima's full history. The island, southwest of the country, is promoted by Japan as a historical site from the Meiji Revolution period. But it was also where some 500 to 800 Koreans were forced to work for little or no pay and hardly any food. Japan had said it would let visitors know that a large number of Koreans were brought there against their will and forced to work in the coal mines under harsh conditions. It also said it was prepared to take measures to commemorate the victims, like setting up an information center. But these promises have not been implemented properly. Japan's implementation report submitted last year not only omitted phrases like forced and against their will, it said simply that a large number of people from the Korean peninsula supported Japanese industry. And the information center, it said, would be in Tokyo, over 1,000 kilometers away from Hashima. Even worse, it was to be set up as a think tank, which could be used to portray the facts as a matter of opinion. In its evaluation Wednesday, adopted by consensus, the committee did not outright ask Japan to use the word forced, but it did urge Japan to fully implement its pledges. It also strongly urged Japan to consider international best practices when it interprets the full history. And as if to further remind Japan of its promises, the draft included Japan's 2015 statement. Japan's delegate to UNESCO, Takeo Yamada, said that Japan intends to carry out the committee's requests and keep its own promises. South Korea's foreign ministry called UNESCO's decision meaningful and said it'll continue to seek dialogue with Tokyo as well as the international community.
Our government will be closely watching Japan's implementation of its promise and continue to urge Tokyo to commemorate the victims in a sincere manner at the earliest time.
Japan's next implementation report is due by December of 2019 and will be examined by the committee in 2020. 이지원, Arirang News.
South Korea's Prime Minister attended a special ceremony today at the top office on behalf of President Moon, who is recovering from a cold. During the event held to commend 100 companies for exemplary efforts to create jobs, Lee Nak-yeon stressed the government will do its best not only to improve employment situation, but to ensure a smooth transition while implementing shorter working hours and raising the minimum wage. Hwang Ho-jun shares with us his remarks.
South Korean Prime Minister Lee Nak-yeon said Thursday that the Moon administration's #1 goal is job creation. And addressing the critics of government spending, he said so far the lion's share of support has gone to the private sector.
There is often this misunderstanding that we're only creating jobs in the public sector, but we used 83% of this year's 17 trillion won budget to help private companies hire more. The government only spent 17% of it.
Lee was speaking at a special ceremony hosted at the Blue House by the Ministry of Employment and Labor. He said the government is doing all it can to create jobs. In particular, he said that simultaneously raising the minimum wage, reducing working hours, and encouraging temp-to-perm transitions will result in not only more jobs but higher quality ones. He did note, however, that the brunt of the changes might be borne by certain groups including young part-time workers, day laborers, and small business owners. He insisted that the government should not and will not ignore their pain, no matter how beneficial that change may be, and pledged to do its best to help them through. Next week, the maximum work hour will be shortened from 68 hours to 52. Lee stressed that the change won't be too painful for businesses because at first the rule will only apply to companies with 300 employees or more.
If you think about it, we started the 5-day work week in 2004. Compared to that, the reduction of working hours is a small change. Working 5 days a week means 40 hours, and setting the work week at 52 hours simply means no more than 12 hours of overtime.
But to alleviate the burden, Prime Minister noted that the government will take the advice of the Korea Employers Federation, which has suggested a 6-month grace period to help companies make a smooth transition. Hwang Ho-jun, Arirang News.
Officials tasked with handling matters related to the nation's economy held a meeting today. They focused on supporting innovative growth and ways to deal with issues linked to the widening wealth gap. Kim Hae-sung has the highlights from that session.
Korea's economic policymakers gathered Thursday to discuss two key issues: tackling income inequality and supporting innovative growth.
Innovative growth is not limited to certain specific areas or companies, but it covers all economic and social areas and helps create jobs. We will look into ways to create a synergy to also solve the income distribution problem.
The wealth gap has widened to record levels in Korea. According to Statistics Korea, the monthly average income for those in the bottom 20% income bracket dropped 8% in the first quarter this year, while income for households in the upper 20% soared 9.3% on year, widening the income gap to nearly 6 times. Minister Kim vouched to pinpoint the cause of such discrepancy and come up with detailed measures to support low-income households by July. At the meeting, ministers also delved into innovative growth plans in construction businesses and fishing villages. The Transport Ministry said it is working on removing regulations in the construction industry and strengthen companies' self-building obligations to boost competitiveness, and promised to come up with detailed plans by the third quarter of this year. Meanwhile, the Ministry of Oceans and Fisheries said it is pushing for the implementation of the so-called Fishing Villages New Deal 300 to modernize outdated fishing villages, saying 300 out of 2,300 fishing ports need to be revamped in order to boost safety and help support tourism in the future. Kim Hae-sung, Arirang News.
We're finally seeing the end of a patent war that seemed to rage forever between the titans of the tech realm. It all started 7 years ago when Apple accused Samsung of stealing key elements of its iPhones. Our Ko Ryuni sheds light on how the two are settling things.
The patent battle started in 2011 when Apple accused Samsung of copying the iPhone's design and software features. The court originally sided with Apple, ordering the Korean tech giant to pay more than $1 billion in damages. The two companies spent the next 6 years in court fighting over the damages amount. A series of appeals pushed the dispute all the way to the Supreme Court in 2016. The most recent decision was made last month when a California jury determined the reward for Apple should be $539 million. However, according to Reuters on Thursday, the two companies are putting the case behind them instead of going through more appeals. The terms of the settlement filed in the U.S. District Court for the Northern District of California were not available, including how much Samsung will pay Apple. But Apple and Samsung have declined to comment. Apple only pointed to a statement released last month following the jury award saying this case has always been more than money. Local news outlets added that although the smartphone market is no longer growing at such an explosive pace, Apple and Samsung will remain competitors in new sectors like self-driving cars and artificial intelligence software. Ko Ryuni, Arirang News.
It was David versus Goliath as South Korea took on Germany in the final group stage match in Russia, a team missing its captain due to injury with no wins in their campaign going up against the defending champs that made the knockout round every time since the 1930s. But the Taeguk Warriors were the stars of this World Cup's biggest underdog story. While the win is not enough to earn them a spot in the Sweet 16, the 2-0 annihilation of the titan of the sport validated that they do have the heart of a champion. Lee Seung-jae has the full story.
The 13th day of the 2018 World Cup was anything but unlucky for South Korea as they produced one of the biggest World Cup upsets ever in Kazan. The Taeguk Warriors, without their captain Ki Sung-young, played by far their best game of this year's World Cup, keeping the Germans at bay for the duration of the match's 90-plus minutes. However, it was in the 3rd minute of stoppage time that world football shook. South Korea's Kim Young-won slotted home a close-range shot that was initially called offside, but upon closer inspection by the video referee, Kim was deemed onside and the goal was awarded to South Korea. The goal sparked desperate scenes from Germany as they realized they were heading toward first-round elimination for the first time since 1938, with goalkeeper Manuel Neuer going on the offense, leaving a gaping hole for Son Heung-min to slot home an easy second goal in the 6th minute of stoppage time. Despite the historic win, South Korea will be leaving Russia along with Germany, but it's the Germans that finished rock bottom of Group F. However, the win was bittersweet, as the 2-0 victory might have been enough for South Korea to progress had it not been for a surprise 3-0 victory by Sweden over Mexico. The result means Sweden and Mexico are the Group F teams that qualify for the last 16. South Korea might be out, but a new star has been born. Goalkeeper Cho Hyun-woo, nicknamed Deheya, a reference to his club team Daegu FC, and in comparison to star Spanish goalkeeper David De Gea, made some of the most impressive saves of the World Cup so far, including 6 against Germany. Joe's heroics between the goalposts have brought him to the attention of several European teams. Lee Seung-jae, Arirang News.
Time to turn to Michelle Bach at the Weather Center for the updates you need. Michelle, the monsoon front is mainly affecting the southern provinces, but it seems like tonight is going to be rough for the capital as well.
Yes, now conditions are very unstable now, so Seoul will receive downpours until tomorrow morning, sometimes accompanied by hail, thunder, and even lightning. Now, meanwhile, Jeju Island is expected to continue receiving more precipitation for the time being. And conditions will remain cloudy for most parts of the country, with the mercury expected to rise under lots of humidity tomorrow. And the morning low in Seoul will be at 22 degrees Celsius, and the same goes for most parts of the country. And it's going to be an exhausting day tomorrow, with the afternoon high soaring up to 29 degrees in Seoul, while Daejeon peaks higher at 30 degrees. And the faraway monsoon front will move back up the country during the weekend, bringing another round of heavy nationwide rain until Monday. I'll leave you with the weather conditions around the world.
That's all we have for you on tonight's edition of Arirang News Center. Thank you for staying with us.